have an opinion about pregnancy that's not the most popular. I loved being pregnant. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. You might think, okay, yeah, she just had an easy time, that's all. It's really not that great. And that's a fair thought. I broke my foot when I was 7 months pregnant, and I spent the last trimester on crutches, one of those little kneeling scooters. I had nausea and vomiting from my first trimester all the way to the end, but I loved it. I mean, in my house, this was our idea of nesting. It was awesome. So when I went into labor, I also went into denial. I'm not having a baby. My due date's in 4 days. There's no way this is the real thing. I went out and ran errands, got a haircut. I think I even went to the bank. My doctor finally had to order me to go to the hospital. So we went, and maybe it was my avoidant attitude that prolonged labor, because it took 48 hours for our baby boy to arrive. But then he did, and he was here, and the doctors handed him to us, and we had that sweet newborn family moment that you've seen on TV and in movies. And then we were sent home to adjust to life as a family of 3. Hard part's over, right? No. 2 months old. My husband had gone back to work. And so it was just me and the baby for most of the daylight hours. Breastfeeding was harder than society had led me to believe it might be. Mom brain was in full force. I'd go to microwave an occasional bite of food, and I'd open the door to find, surprise, yesterday's coffee, waiting to greet me. I worried about the baby a lot, but I'd never done this before. And moms worry, right? I knew postpartum anxiety was something you could have, but I didn't know what it looked like. And I wondered, what if this might be it? So I started seeing a therapist to help me deal with what I was going through. 3 months. Now it was my turn to go back to work. Now, don't tell him this, but I was thrilled to leave him with someone else. I was a work person. Is it possible to go through withdrawal from Microsoft Excel and bad corporate coffee? Still, it had been a hard transition, so before I went back to work, I saw my doctor. What brings you in today? She asked. Well, I had a baby about 3 months ago. I beat around the bush for a while because I was nervous to talk about this, and I finally said, I think I might be dealing with some postpartum depression. Oh, you don't look too down and out. She gave me a prescription, and she sent me on my way. That was it. 4 months old. Something changed when I went to the doctor that day. I'd already been keeping things quiet, but quiet turned to silence. The circle of people who knew what was going on got no bigger than the handful who were already in it. I started to manage my emotional anguish by causing myself physical pain. I'd never understood why people would self-harm as a coping mechanism. And then I understood. Now, I made sure when I left the house, my hair was done, my clothes were clean. I wanted to look like I was managing new motherhood so well. When you think the world doesn't care, you learn to put on a mask every time you go outside. 6 months. My depression symptoms were moving from moderate to severe. I was trying to find help, but every local psychiatric resource had a 3-month waiting list. I was hopeful when I found a postpartum depression support group. But in 4 months of attending, I was the only person who ever came. I knew there must be more people out there who were dealing with this. I knew that. But the evidence I could see, a room full of empty chairs, week after week. That said, you're alone. You have to keep showing up for your life when you have depression, even though you really don't want to. And one of the things I had to keep showing up for were my son's appointments with a pediatrician. At our 6-month visit, we went in, and the nurse started by asking us the question, "How are we doing today?" "Baby's doing great," I said, as I went into performance mode. And then I stopped. But I'm suffering pretty badly from postpartum depression. And I'm trying to get help, but I can't seem to find where I need to go. This nurse's reaction, stopping what she was doing, coming over to me, it told me that maybe I'm not alone. 8 months. I finally connected with a care provider who could help me manage this condition. She was a nurse practitioner who had a background in both obstetrics and mental health. She was qualified. And she diagnosed me with postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. And postpartum onset OCD, which I didn't even know was a thing you could have. I was in the right hands. It was still hard to manage. On top of the 3 diagnoses I got, we realized my depression was treatment resistant, which is a fancy way of saying that medication's not really working and we don't know why. 10 months. My depression worsened and worsened. I was nearing rock bottom. I was in the right hands. We couldn't figure it out. Is this numbness my new normal? Maybe this is motherhood. God, it's not what I imagined. Driving home from work sometimes, I would think, what happened if I would just drift into the other lane and drive into oncoming traffic? I was out shopping one day in a department store, one that has music playing as customers browse. And I don't know what made this happen, but I realized I couldn't hear the music anymore. And instead of the music, I was hearing the sounds of the delivery room right after my son was born. I froze. I was having a flashback. Earlier, I left out a part of my birth story. Shortly after our baby was delivered, my temperature spiked to over 104 degrees. My blood pressure dropped. I became delirious and was shaking. And working in healthcare at the time, I knew these as signs of septic shock, and I became convinced I was dying. The infection was managed relatively quickly. The healthcare team got things under control, but a trauma had already occurred. My body soaked up every sound, every scent, every emotion like a sponge. And something about the music that day inexplicably caused my brain to wring it out, flooding me with a rush of emotion like it was happening all over again. We didn't know it, but I'd been suffering for months with PTSD. 11 months. We finally had a diagnosis. Heck, we had 4 of them. And somehow, still, things weren't turning around. It was so hard to see that it had been almost a year that I didn't get to show up for motherhood the way I wanted to. I was angry, I was frustrated, and I was scared. If it took me, with all of the unearned privilege I had working in my favor, this much effort to try and fail to get better, what hope did that give anybody else going through this? I saw my son's birthday looming on the calendar, and I was in no mood to celebrate. So I boycotted it. He's not gonna remember. I let his grandparents stage some party photos to pretend we had a celebration. I didn't sing, I didn't bake a cake, we didn't blow out candles. I wanted nothing to do with a joyous occasion. My husband, who's a mental health care professional, suggested that I look into an intensive outpatient program, or an IOP, for treatment. It was a good suggestion, but the nearest IOP specific to perinatal care was outside of Chicago. It just wasn't feasible. People handle adversity and frustration in a lot of different ways, and at this point, I was just mad. So my version of handling it was saying, screw this, I'm inventing my own treatment protocol. I'm incredibly qualified. I called it a my OP. It involved me taking a medical leave from work, commuting 2 days a week to Indianapolis to attend outpatient postpartum depression support groups. And there, sitting amongst fellow sufferers, my experience was normalized for the very first time. It was still a long road, and it would take several more months, but this was the piece we needed, and I was finally on the road to recovery. 2 years. We are in the throes of raising a cute, chatty, construction vehicle obsessed toddler. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I spent an obscene amount of money on his second birthday. It wasn't about him, though. He's still not gonna remember. It was to celebrate my recovery. One of the hardest things I had to do was forget everything I thought I knew about postpartum depression. What people often call postpartum depression, or sometimes just postpartum, is actually a collection of 6 different mood and anxiety disorders. Calling them all depression is like calling all pasta spaghetti. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders can include depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, all 4 of which I experienced, bipolar disorder, and postpartum psychosis. We know that these conditions are underreported and underdiagnosed, especially in women of color. Research conservatively estimates that 1 in every 7 births, the parent who births has 1 or more of these conditions. And those numbers are even higher for teen moms and for those experiencing poverty. We also know now that these disorders are not just limited to birthing parents. 1 in 10 fathers or non-birthing parents experiences 1 or more as well. In 2017, the year my son was born, there were 3.8 million babies born in the United States. By those estimates of 1 in 7 and 1 in 10, that means over 900,000 parents were dealing with something similar to what I was. Almost 1 million people. These conversations have to be brought out of the shadows, because I suspect many of those parents were suffering in silence like I was. We need to be able to destigmatize these conversations and bring them out into the open, but in order to do that, we need allies who understand the realities of these conditions and can help have those conversations. We need people like you. Here's what you can do. When new babies arrive in the lives of your friends and your families, ask the new parents what this experience has been like for them. And then listen while they answer you. Let them say as much or as little as they want. You know now these disorders are complex. They're real. But most importantly, they're treatable. You have the power to change the conversation. You can make sure the conversation doesn't include something that's accidentally dismissive, like, you don't look too down and out. You can make sure the conversation is compassionate and empathetic. How are we doing today? Thank you.